The hematoma that I experienced, the bruising I experienced when I had my mastectomy, like, it was pretty obvious that what they were doing was wrong, and no one really took accountability then either. When I first detransitioned and I stopped hormones, I was responding to the toll that the hormones were taking on my body. At that point, it wasn't, I never should have taken hormones to begin with. I was in survival, frankly, and just trying to set my health straight. I wasn't even thinking about these tertiary, at the time, concerns.
How did it reach the Supreme Court of Texas?
There's disagreement between us and lower courts and how to handle the specific issue when an act differs from the harm that the act causes in terms of when it happens. So you have, on one hand, when an act occurs, and you have, on the other hand, when harm occurs. And we have to decide, does the clock start when the act happens or when the harm happens? So when the time came I needed a letter to get this surgery, I was like, hey, will you write me this letter? And she was like, yeah, sure, tell me what to write.
She asked you what she should write.
Yeah.
Did they at any point talk to you about the risks? Did they tell you what you should expect, what's normal?
There was a lot of dismissal around the potential ways that these procedures could go wrong.
It's just not a big deal. We're just not even going to go there.
Yeah, precisely.
I'm so honored that I get to sit here now and talk to you about your legal case and what's been going on. Before we get into your case and the updates with that, I want to read a portion of your lawsuit, which, if people haven't had the opportunity to read, it's about 30 pages long, and I'm not going to read all 30 pages. I'm just going to read the first paragraph. But it was very impactful to me, and I think it's important that we read it. It says, this lawsuit details a chronology of wrongful acts committed by a collective of medical providers who, in their pursuit of experimental, gender-affirming medical therapies, administered a series of ruinous procedures and treatments to plaintiff Soren Aldaco. Despite these telltale signs demanding caution and therapeutic resolution, however, the defendants deliberately and recklessly propelled Soren down a path of permanent physical disfigurement and worsening psychological distress. What goes through your mind when we read that?
Well, it's definitely interesting having it read back to me and having it read out loud at that, because it's a document and an explanation of my life that I've read on paper so many times, because this lawsuit has been going on for 3 years now. I think more than anything, it just reminds me how far I've come and just how far I have to go still, insofar that I'm in a much better place in some ways than I was when I was that teenager receiving that care. And also, as we stated in that lawsuit, the consequences are lifelong, and it's something that, hearing it out loud, I'm reminded, I'm 23, almost 24 now. That's a lot of years ahead of me for these to be ongoing. So that's what I think right off the bat.
For people who don't know, walk us through very simply why you're suing and what you hope the result will be.
My main goal with suing was to affect the culture in a way where people would not even have the opportunity to be harmed like I was harmed. There would not be this monetary incentive for providers to treat you on the front end but do nothing on the back end. We actually passed legislation in Texas last session in support of that. But I remember having the intention of really holding my providers accountable. And so why we sued was because my providers messed up in a lot of ways. I shouldn't have even received the so-called care that they gave me or didn't give me, right? But when they did try, it just made things worse in a way that I felt like was foreseeable, that the flags were there for them to interpret as red flags. My mental health, the hematoma that I experienced, the bruising I experienced when I had my mastectomy, it was pretty obvious that what they were doing was wrong, and no one really took accountability then either. So it's an amalgam of things, but the primary things are the fact that it shouldn't have happened in the first place, and it created more problems than it had to when it did.
So currently in the state of Texas, there is a statute of limitations, which I know you discovered the unfortunate reality of the fact that there's only 2 years in Texas. Why is 2 years not enough time?
Great question. It's an issue that's much bigger than me in my case, which is why I'm so proud that it's made it up to the Supreme Court of Texas, right? The main issue with a 2-year statute of limitations is that in cases like mine, the harm doesn't always manifest right away. And even when it is manifest, there are myriad factors that might influence someone to not accept that harm. When I first detransitioned and I stopped hormones, I was responding to the toll that the hormones were taking on my body. At that point, it wasn't, I never should have taken hormones to begin with. I was in survival, frankly, and just trying to set my health straight. I wasn't even thinking about these tertiary, at the time, concerns about right and wrong and whether providers should have even given me those to begin with. And
Right.
once my body began to heal and my head got clear, a few months had already passed. And then I spent the next year trying to get representation.
Yeah.
And, when you're dealing with an issue that is not only taboo, but is on land that's uncharted,
That's right.
how are you supposed to encounter representation, expert witnesses, etc., to be able to argue your case effectively,
Yeah,
especially when
this
it's
is
still,
a new legal landscape.
yeah,
This is, like you said, uncharted territory.
yeah.
Um, so yes, keep going. Tell us what happened then.
I remember feeling very relieved that somebody was taking this as seriously as I knew it needed to be taken. And I remember feeling a little worried because, A, what was I bringing onto myself and my family when we'd already been through so much? But also, B, this was a coalition of people who were brought together by their faith and by their belief that this issue needed to be addressed. And I knew that there would be a lot that we would have to learn together, not just as they learn how to be medical malpractice attorneys, but also as we navigated that uncharted territory and faced moments like what we're facing now, where the Supreme Court of Texas has to decide on an issue that affects much more than just the outcome of here and now with me.
Yeah. How did it reach the Supreme Court of Texas?
Oh, that's a great question, and one that I've actually taken a lot of time to wrap my head around because, again, I'm not a lawyer, but from my understanding, it has to do with a lot of appeals.
Okay.
That basically there's disagreement between us and lower courts and in other courts dealing with other cases on how to handle the specific issue when an act differs from the harm that the act causes in terms of when it happens. So you have on one hand, when an act occurs, and you have on the other hand, when harm occurs.
Right.
And we have to decide, does the clock start when the act happens or when the harm happens? And we're arguing that it starts when the harm happens because that's why I'm suing, is because of harm.
What is your mindset going into that day?
I have so much else on my plate. So it's really hitting me now that, man, this is a big deal. This is a huge deal. It's a landmark case. And I think my mindset going into February 11th is that of a warrior in many ways, where I focus on the battle that's before me. And this is the battle that is before me now. And we're going to go in and we're going to give it the best shot we can, arguing it and its importance in front of the Supreme Court of Texas. And then for me as a woman of faith, like it's, vengeance is God's. So I do have faith that it'll work out, but I'm really just focusing on doing my part and focusing on what matters in the moment.
What has the support been like from your family? Have they been supportive of what you're doing?
I would say my mom and my stepdad and that side of the family has, for sure. Those were the family members that I was estranged from during my transition. And I know they have been just so grateful and have felt so blessed to not only have me come back to them in that way, but for us to have a really, well-rounded and deep relationship now. Same with my husband. He's been an amazing support through all of this. And I will say some parts of my family, namely those that were involved pretty intimately with my transition, have been nowhere to be found basically since the filings. And I haven't really gotten much word out of them as to why, but I do know that, and this is going to be something we're going to have to pay attention to as more and more young people, minors especially, come forward about their discontent in the space, that it's really hard for the families to admit when they've caused their own child harm, because we love our kids so much and so many of us are doing everything we can to protect them.
Okay, so you are naming 5 providers, and I think it's important to say their names. Dr. Srinath Nikalapu, Del Scott Perry, Barbara Wood, your therapist, Ashley De Leon at the Crane Center, and Dr. Richard Santucci. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go back a little bit to when you started to face these feelings of confusion in middle school, going into high school. You were sexualized at an early age. You were introduced to anime and fandom and role-playing spaces online. A lot of people, when they hear the word anime, they don't understand how highly pornographied anime is. It's something that we still, especially the older generation, I think they view it, and many people view it, as just innocent cartoons.
Yeah, like Naruto.
Tell us why that's not the case. Explain kind of what that world is like for someone who doesn't know.
A lot of the anime that we've seen come out in recent years, I think largely comes out of the culture of the internet, which we've seen transform and pornographize a lot of areas and domains of life in addition to anime. Part of what I think makes anime different is it comes from a different culture. So there's less familiarity, I think, from parents and understanding some of the cultural factors there, and maybe how to screen it like you might content here in America. There is a lack of understanding that not all anime, even though it's cartoon-like, is for kids, that much of it is for adult audiences, like how we have mature films and mature TV shows here. Anime isn't limited to just being PG and PG-13 over there.
I think for a lot of people, it looks like a very innocent thing to allow their kids to do, to engage in, to watch. It sounds like your parents actually, they tried to protect you from a lot of this online content. But you were a very smart kid, and you went around that. So talk a little bit about what that was like, maybe so other parents can learn from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my parents were pretty proactive, my stepdad especially, with putting parental controls on my devices. Unfortunately, my stepdad was disabled, so he was on medications, knocked out for most of the time. It was the tail end of the opiate crisis. My mom worked to keep a roof over our head. And so they'd put the parental controls in place, and being Gen X's who grew up with technology, but not this technology, kind of trusted it to do its job. And, didn't realize that my DSi, my 3DS, these little Nintendo handheld consoles had access to the internet too. And so, yeah, I was getting around the parental controls. And what's interesting is actually before I started watching anime, I would draw anime characters because that's what I was seeing online and online art spaces, was that cutesy, very cookie cutter style, being something that was easy to learn. And I began to role play through drawings first and foremost before it was ever text-based, right? And I think from there, seeing me draw on my little Nintendo device, my parents had no, their hackles weren't raised at that because it's just art. It's just fun. It's cutesy little characters. My grandma actually still has a drawing of this anime girl I made when I was like in 3rd grade that I learned how to draw alongside my Girl Scout troop. But what they didn't realize, and what I didn't realize being a kid with a lack of experience and the wisdom that comes out of that experience, was how many adults were into that style of art and were in those same spaces because of that shared interest. And that's when I got into role playing through what were, to me as a kid, an innocent kid, innocent, cutesy kid drawings. It went from just role playing friends hanging out to role playing like people kissing and having sex. And I think it really underscores how maybe anime in and of itself isn't grooming material, but how it can be leveraged due to its innocence to get young people who think they're doing something innocent to do something that really fundamentally is bad and not good for them.
Right. Would you say that you were groomed online?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like pretty objectively.
Okay. What was the primary way that happened? I know that you've talked about how you logged into online chat rooms. What happened after that?
It was primarily trying to role play with people like I would in those art-based forums, but it was text-based. And so I would talk to people trying to get them to role play going to the lunchroom and being friends, and they would try to get me to role play like having sex with them and really doing inappropriate things. And that would turn into asking me, soliciting images of myself at that age.
So they introduced these ideas to you online that you had never really learned or known before,
Yeah.
would you say? So all of a sudden, these concepts about sex and kissing and relationships started making their way into your online chat rooms.
Yeah.
So after that, you, at the age of 11, is when you started identifying as transgender, right?
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, found yourself at a transgender support group.
Yeah. And what's funny about that is I didn't just find myself at a transgender support group. I was taken there by my dad and my stepmom. But yeah, I was going to the support group with them. And at the support group, there were um, 3 different groups within the group. One for adults who identified as transgender, one for their allies. They called them SOFAs, significant others, friends, family, and allies, and one for trans kids. And we'd have a first part of the meeting that was everybody together talking about issues that were going on and developments in the organization and next meetings and whatever. And then we'd split off and I would be in this subgroup with just a bunch of other mainly mentally ill kids. And we talk about all sorts of stuff, from relationships in some of those online chat rooms, and parallel spaces to who was getting the next surgery and what we wanted to do as part of realizing our transgender life.
Okay. How did that influence you to take the next steps in your transition?
Yeah. Well, it alienated me from my family because I saw all of these young people whose transitions were being facilitated by their families. And given that my family that didn't have any role in my life growing up and that had no legal relationship to me, even then, was taking me to these groups, but my family that would be the ones to say yes to everything were the ones that were putting on the brakes, saying, no, this isn't going to happen. You can figure it out later, but not now. That made me confused because I just remember thinking like, man, why isn't this my family? Like, why aren't my parents like that? Why are my parents saying no? Everybody here is so happy because they're getting what they want, right?
Yeah. And they're getting affirmed.
And they're getting affirmed.
And accepted. And
I didn't have the wisdom to understand that instant gratification and feeling good about yourself doesn't mean that what you're doing is actually good for you.
in that support group, you met someone who would later facilitate your transition. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. One of the SOFAs was a nurse practitioner, Del Scott Perry, who his own child, an adult at the time, but his child nonetheless, had been transitioning. And so he was actually, from my knowledge, facilitating the transitions, medically speaking, of many of the adult and minor members of that group.
Okay, so how did this work? You just went up to him and were like, "Hey, would you prescribe me some testosterone?" Like, how did this work?
Well, I wish I remembered the exact encounter, but put simply, he was in the same support group that my dad and my stepmom were. So they had spent weeks, months getting to know each other in this support group. I don't know the conversations that went on. I can't say for sure. But I remember when the time came and we decided, that part of my family, to take me to get hormones, he was who we immediately thought of because they already knew him. He was already familiar with my story.
Okay.
I don't know how familiar, but the familiarity was there. And yeah, it seemed like the no-brainer. He was willing to give it to basically anybody else in the group. So why not me?
So your dad and your stepmom were supportive of you going to see him to get these hormones prescribed?
Yeah, my stepmom took me, so I would presume so.
Okay. Would you say that she did that because she thought in some way that she was supporting you? Like, what do you feel like the thought process was? I know you can't obviously speak to that fully, but What do you think was going on to where she kind of led you down that path?
Yeah, you're right that I can't read her mind.
Right.
At the same time, I did feel very strongly that they wanted to help me. They saw this child before them, that they knew their absence had contributed to my mental health problems. And whether that was conscious or subconscious, I think to do nothing would have been cruel. And obviously, not being equipped with my history, they didn't know how to actually help me.
Yeah.
My mom and my stepdad, they were at capacity, so they didn't really know how to help either.
Yeah.
And it left me in a way between a rock and a hard place, because for the longest time, like, I didn't think that they had any ill intention in facilitating that part of my transition. Like, they're my parents,
Yeah.
regardless of how bad of parents they had been up until that point, being not in my life. I think that they genuinely thought this would help.
Yeah.
At the same time, I would expect more discernment from adults in when they're facing options, maybe having more caution and not letting the child guide. Because I do think that they were irreverent in applying their understanding, however limited, of me to making a decision they actually thought logically, critically thinking was great.
For people who are grappling with questions about their gender identity or with confusion, how would you advise them? What would you tell them?
I think I'd want to tell them a lot of things, but more than anything, I would want them to really sit with the truth that what they want isn't always what they need. And that is such a simple, straightforward truth, but it is a really important one, because, and we know this pretty plainly with kids who want to eat nothing but candy, but our cravings aren't always driven by our best interests. And often our cravings, in fact, are driven by either what we're used to, what we think we need, or by what's easiest. But what we actually understand is we get more satisfaction from the process to obtaining something than we actually do from the thing. That's why puberty is so important, because it's this process to becoming an adult, to becoming a full, flesh and blood and spirit person. And when you take a shortcut by stopping your period, which is not something comfortable, but is something that you need, right? Or by amputating parts of your body or surgically disfiguring them, you're forgoing all of that necessary, albeit gritty, development that's actually going to make something feel satisfying. And that's also because satisfying doesn't mean feels good. Satisfying means pays off. And I think having integrity of the mind, body, and spirit is so important. And you're not going to get that from these interventions.
Going back to your interactions with your medical and mental health providers, the ones that you're suing, how do you wish that they would have treated you? Or what questions do you wish that they would have asked at the time?
I wish we really would have dug into the underpinnings of my feelings, not rushing around in them and just rehashing them out to my detriment, but really asking, where does that feeling come from? Why do you, like, what does it mean that you think you're a boy or you don't want to be a girl? Okay, it's, you don't like your body parts. Okay. Where do you think that feeling comes from? Because we're not born disliking our body parts. Like, do you think you're fat? Do you think that you're not meant to have this part when that part's available? Like, whatever. And I think that would require some kind of critical thinking that just really isn't emphasized or taught in our institutions currently. But yeah, I think really digging into the why would have been the most helpful. But yeah, no one really did that either.
After you started taking testosterone, I think at 17?
Yeah, at 17.
17 years old. How long were you on testosterone?
2 years, almost exactly.
Okay. Describe some of the changes that took place in that time for you physically. And
pretty immediately, my voice began to get deeper and I was growing facial hair. Just the feeling in my body was different in terms of my energy and my mood. I remember finding it very difficult to feel the full spectrum of my emotions. There was a poem I had written sometime in November 2021, so about a year and a half after I started testosterone, where I remember writing, I feel like I feel my emotions at 20%. And over time, the gynecological symptoms started to present, and those are really tough. I was having a lot of just systemic issues as well, like joint pain, headaches, dizziness, swelling. And the nurse practitioner who was prescribing me the hormones, who was also my primary care physician, he was just, writing referrals to go see specialists for those problems. There was never any thought put into, is this the testosterone? Like, is this us meddling with her, like, sex hormones that underlie literally everything else, that underlie long-term homeostasis in her body? No, I don't think so. Go see the neurologist. It was pretty messed up.
You at no point had like second thoughts about taking testosterone based on everything going on?
Not until the end. No, I was going through so much more in my life, like coming off of the COVID pandemic, right? And like the way that everything was shut down, and just being really alienated from my peers. And then college started online too. And I was at home, and I was also going through a really messy breakup with another woman who I transitioned alongside, and who later I detransitioned alongside also. And that was very, ended up being pretty violent in the end. And yeah, there wasn't a lot of second thoughts until I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I was sitting in an office with the OB-GYN, actually, a male OB-GYN who was there with a resident, both of them male. And I was having vaginal atrophy. And I remember he was wearing a cowboy's mask. I couldn't even see his face. And I'm just pantsless, legs open. And he's like, we could give you a hysterectomy. And that would probably, like, because, this might cause problems more than the atrophy down the line. It might cause some atrophying of your actual ovaries and uterus. And we can just, and I was like, bro, what? Like, I came here for the atrophy, and you're talking to me about getting a hysterectomy, or at least a partial. And he was like, you can think about it. I'm like, yeah, I'll think about it. And he's like, but we could go ahead and put you down for surgery, and you can just cancel it later. And I was like, yeah, no, dude, like, give me the topical estrogen and let me leave. And I remember at that point, I was like, okay, actually, what? That's something I haven't talked a whole lot about. He's not named in my lawsuit because he didn't do anything, right? There's like no record of this conversation, but that was definitely a moment where I was like, okay, wow, this isn't just a symptom I can address off to the side. Maybe there's some actual issues going on here, because the topical estrogen didn't even really work.
So wait a minute. When did this conversation happen? How old were you?
I was 19. It was like November 2021.
So a provider looked you in the face and said, you should get a hysterectomy.
Yeah, pretty much. I remember the exact words, but that was the sentiment
This would be a good thing for you.
Yeah.
To get a hysterectomy.
Yeah, and when I expressed concern over, I'm going to lose my ability to produce my own hormones. No. He was like, we can do a partial. We can keep the ovaries and get rid of the uterus. And I was like, what? Yeah, no, that was his recommendation in front of in front of the resident too.
Absurd. Okay. We'll talk about the letter that your therapist wrote to the Crane Center.
So when the time came, I needed a letter to get this surgery. I was like, hey, will you write me this letter? And she was like, yeah, sure. Tell me what to write.
She asked you what she should write.
Yeah. And keep in mind, this was right around the same time that I disclosed to her about that horrific sexual abuse that I experienced online. I told her, like, hey, I have some sexual abuse that I'd like to talk about. I don't want to talk about it today, but I think this is important. And that was, it's like in one spot in her notes around that same time.
It just wasn't even discussed.
Wasn't important to her. I will say, I do think it's extremely common. We see this with the OnlyFans issue that's happening too, as a bunch of young women are going and starting OnlyFans. I think that, like, in the age of the internet, sexual abuse online is a huge, huge issue. And a lot of parents don't know how to even protect their kids from it, right? And we're seeing it manifest in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think the transgender identity is a really, really good outcome if you're trying to run away from all that trauma. You can just package yourself up with this nice, neat bow that you've actually been a boy all along, and you don't have to deal with the trauma and the way that trauma is manifesting in pain and in rejection of your body.
So she wrote you a letter to see the Crane Center. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so she wrote me a letter. I sent her what the Crane Center had given me, which was like a pamphlet of all the do's and don'ts of writing this letter. The pamphlet also included places I could go to get this letter in the community that they had established rapport with. If I didn't have a provider of my own. So they were pretty much telling me how to get this letter for certain. And so I gave this document to her. She wrote the letter. She sent me a paper copy with a little moon stamp, I remember, on the envelope, and also a virtual copy too. And I remember I sent that over to the Crane Center. They were like, cool. And we proceeded with scheduling from there.
Okay. And when did you have your first visit with the Crane Center?
I want to say it was beginning of 2021. It was like January or March, sometime in that time frame. I don't know the exact date, but it was about half a year out from surgery.
Okay. And you were how old?
I was 18 during those consultations.
Okay. And did they at any point talk to you about the risks? Did they tell you what you should expect, what's normal, what's
They
not?
they glossed over them. There was like mention, but it was the De Leon is real matter of fact in how she speaks. It was kind of just like, yeah, here's the things I have to tell you. I remember at one point in the videos I had to watch online, they were talking about complications. And there was some statement to the effect of, yeah, but like we haven't really experienced these in our office. There was a lot of dismissal around the potential ways that these procedures could go wrong.
It's just not a big deal. We're just not even going to go there.
Yeah, precisely.
And then at that point, how did you decide to move ahead with the surgery?
Well, it seemed like an opportunity that I'd had dangled in front of my face since my time with that psychiatrist at 15, and particularly following my experiences in the support group. And so having it feel so life or death because of the culture, because of the fact that I had the money and it was staring me in the face, and just the difficulties I had perceived in getting there, even though looking back, there was actually a lot of support from allies along the way. It felt like a no-brainer to take it, especially when I hadn't really received any kind of resistance except a little bit from my mom and from one practitioner, a rheumatologist, who said my joint pain probably wasn't because I had an autoimmune disorder. It was probably from my high-risk drug usage, which is what she put in my chart relating to the testosterone.
When you, in the days leading up to your double mastectomy, how did you feel? Were you excited? Were you hopeful?
I was over the moon. I thought this was going to fix my problems. I thought this was what I needed. This was the next step because I wasn't planning on getting bottom surgery. Like this was going to be my kind of like, it was going to be the capstone of my transition. And I remember really hyping it up with my stepmom. I was going off of my NSAIDs because I was on like 14 different medications at the time, and one of them was an NSAID. I remember going off my NSAIDs and riding around in one of those mobility scooters in Walmart, picking up all these last minute supplies with my dad, my stepmom, my little sister. And just the stories that I was putting on my Snapchat at the time were just, I was so excited. I was in so much pain from the withdrawal from all the drugs I had been taking, but I was just so ready to yeet the teat, as some people have said online. And I didn't even know what was going to happen. Like I had no idea what was to come. But I remember it was very ritualistic, is what it felt like. It felt ritualistic to not just do it, but to perform it to the community.
So you were excited, you were hopeful. And you know, when I think back to some of the times when I would see transgender kids come through the clinic where I was working. At first, the changes are new and exciting, and you're very enthusiastic, as you said, about, in my case, as children were put on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, the changes that would take place in their body, and I would watch the metamorphosis, if you will, of girls who were trying to look like boys and vice versa. A couple of months down the road, when they're coming back into the clinic for checkups, I would notice that they weren't quite as excited anymore. Like it had worn off a little bit. And the reality of their choices had finally started to set in, where they're having all of these issues that they've never experienced or imagined before, similar to what you've said. I wonder when the reality set in for you after you had had the double mastectomy at the Crane Center. What happened after that?
I think reality really set in for me when my doctors ghosted me. When I presented with complications and I did my research and my due diligence to reach out to them with what was going on, and they were just kind of like, that's not that big of a deal. And then all of a sudden they're really nowhere to be found. And, there's photos of me immediately following the care I had received at a local ER from a totally different team to help mitigate that complication, where I'm just smiling and my chest is bloody and bruised and I have drains sticking out from underneath my arms where they had opened things back up. I with the help of others, like did that to myself. And I think at that point made me really start to question, where's the incentive for this? Like where there's incentive, obviously it's medicine. I watched my stepdad be drugged his entire life, in the same medical system that I was then getting drugged my entire life through. And, that's when it just really hit me like, yeah, no, money is a big component, and, opportunism is a big component. People just, jumping on this because it's the right thing to do, and it makes the bank. And I just became really uneasy after that, combining that with what I was learning in school about human development, and also with, the complications I was experiencing in other realms.
Can you talk a little bit about those complications?
So the complications I experienced after my surgery were, bilateral hematoma. So I had pretty bad bruising, essentially that was pooling in my chest cavity. And I discovered this because, I looked under the medical binder on about day 3 or 4 of my recovery post-surgery and saw bruising. And it was different because online you see these before and after shots of people who are showing their chests with boobs and then showing their chests after they've had the double mastectomy. And they're like perfect, basically. Like they open up the medical binder and, oh my gosh, like my chest, it just looks like a boy's chest. And mine was not looking like that. It was purple and yellow and it was bad. And, I reached out, and at that point, Dr. Santucci actually was the one who had dealt with my complication then. And he handled it so well at the time. Like he was like, oh, it's just bruising. Bruising happens, unfortunately, sometimes. He knew I was a little neurotic. He was like, just watch the colors get lighter. And as the colors get lighter, you'll know you're getting better, and that's going to be okay. And then I'm watching the colors get darker and darker, and I'm like, like, this is the opposite of what you said. And of course, he'd be the one on the phone with me later telling me there's nothing wrong here while I'm like purple and I have boobs again. But the main thing that ticked me off was I had a bunch of bruising in my hips. I was super concerned by that because I didn't even have surgery there. Yeah. And so that's when I realized this was huge. My nipple grafts were starting to peel. Again, as I'd mentioned just a few moments ago, I looked like I had boobs again, and that was the whole point of having the surgery, right?
Were you scared at all? Because I imagine looking down, seeing all this bruising, seeing these hematomas, this internal bleeding. At what moment did you just say, there is something seriously wrong?
Not until I got that gut instinct the day I went into the ER. I was kind of allowing myself to be gaslit for a while there. It's a bad habit I have, is I trust everybody so open-heartedly. Like I assume the best in everyone because I know I have really good intentions. And so in that moment, like when I had the fever and my chest felt warm to the touch, I was just kind of like, something is really wrong here. Yeah. I don't care what you're saying, Mr. Doctor Man, like something is really wrong here. And that's really when I decided I have to do something about this now, or I could die. I did have an infection. They treated me with IV antibiotics when I went in. So that was the scariest part.
So you went to a different hospital in the DFW area, yeah, and they helped you?
Yeah, a breast oncology team helped me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they were kind to you. They were compassionate.
They deal with vulnerable women all the time.
That's wonderful. What happened after that?
I went back home and I had to drain my chest manually 3 times a day. I had to take my hand and I had to push the blood through a hole that they had cut in the side of my body. And I did that for about a week or 2, while at the same time I had to wear these foam pads that were ace bandaged to my chest, basically 24 hours a day, just to keep the pressure on there. So all the swelling would go down and the blood would stop pooling. And there was just a lot of involved medical care, far more than if I had just had drains to begin with. For about the next couple of weeks.
Do you feel like that medical care was fully explained to you before you had the procedure?
No, it absolutely wasn't. You actually, when you were explaining a little while ago about the way that people become disillusioned with these procedures, it actually reminded me a lot of like a relationship and what I've learned from like marriage, where it's like, you really have to understand what you're getting into, not in the sense that you have to understand everything about a person, but you have to accept like life has ups and downs, marriage has ups and downs, and you can't just be like, whoa, what do you mean that like things are hard when you're 3 months in and the honeymoon phase is over? And that's kind of how I feel transition is for a lot of people. Like it's getting into an abusive relationship where you don't do your due diligence and you don't understand what you're actually like. All the signs are there in front of you. You can Google this today. You can see that these things are dangerous. It's out there. It's obvious. And you're You're like, no, it's like all of your family telling you, hey, this guy is no good. I saw him at the corner store with another girl, like, cut it out. And you're just like, actually, mom, you know nothing. And so yeah, I think that it's something that I had no idea what I was getting myself into, even complications aside.
Yeah.
You don't expect to be 19 going through menopause.
Yeah.
And if you think you do, you don't. Like, you don't
Absolutely.
understand what that's like.
When did you decide that you were going to detransition?
It happened with stopping the hormones first. When I realized that the only way I was going to alleviate some of the medical suffering I was experiencing was by cutting out what I was doing to myself at that point. And so I stopped the hormones, and I realized I didn't die by stopping the hormones. And by that, I mean, I didn't need them to survive. And I started to question, like, did I need any of this? And I also started to question, just, is life really as one track? Is it really one track in the way I'd been assuming it to be through that kind of fixed and rigid mindset that led me to getting an autism diagnosis at 15? And, over the years, I've become a lot more flexible and comfortable in myself. And I've actually addressed a lot of the mental issues that led me to transition in the first place. Yeah, I think it was me really just opening my mind to the idea that there were other ways to achieve healing that actually addressed the root causes, that brought my family closer together and out of dysfunction, that taught me to cope and build resilience. And those have served me in way more areas of life than transition ever did. So
You've talked a little bit about your faith and about mindfulness and how that's helped you.
yeah.
Tell me what that was like.
Well, before I even really had the words or the framework for it, I think I just I felt the love of Jesus, and I felt like what it meant to find and try to be one with God and to really be obedient, and just kind of accepting things as they are and accepting them as they aren't. And at the time, prior to having that framework, I just knew that there was a way to calm myself from the inside and to find peace and to just be content and to trust and to have faith, right? And that brought me more peace than any of the other things I've mentioned, frankly.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was huge. It was just regulating my nervous system, right?
Yeah.
Taking deep breaths, but also just kind of understanding that, like, if I can listen to what I called that inner voice at that time, like listen to the Holy Spirit, that like I would be able to be moved in the directions I needed to go. And things just stopped feeling so tough. Not that they weren't hard still, right? Like, but I didn't feel like I was fighting myself anymore.
I'm so happy to hear that you've found peace and that you've found purpose amidst what's happened. What did you grieve the most when you detransitioned?
I think in a lot of ways I grieved things being so simple. I thought they were a lot more straightforward in life. I think things were a lot more straightforward than they actually are. And so, and also that things are straightforward in the ways I thought they were complex, right? I grieved my understanding of the world. I grieved the trust I had in people and in institutions. I grieved the relationship with my dad and my stepmom and my little sister, in losing closeness with them, because that's what we bonded over, was my transition. And then I also grieved my relationship with my mom, my stepdad, and that part of my family, because of the years that I felt I had lost, that I've since, I think, regained just by being close and honest with them. But there was just a lot of grief in a lot of areas, but those primarily.
Looking towards the future, what are you most hopeful for? What are you excited about?
Generally?
Yeah. You just got married.
Yeah, I did, which is pretty exciting. Thank you.
That's
Thank
very
you.
exciting.
It's definitely, it's a big thing in my life, and just working through all like the good parts and then like the hard parts that also kind of feel good because you're like becoming a better person and watching the person you love become a better person. Those are really nice. So I'm definitely looking forward to life with my husband. I think I'm also looking forward to just seeing where God guides me. I don't know what's next in my life. I'm working on my graduate education right now, but I'm also having conversations with awesome people like you, and really just trying to use my voice with both like authority in the ways that I have and humility in the ways that I don't. I'm really just excited to see what I'm like meant for. Like I think it's beautiful to both be an agent and to watch it unfold, like truly.
I think in my own life, I've found that there is nothing more fulfilling than walking in your purpose. Yeah. And it sounds like you've found your purpose, that this is what The story of Joseph, I think of that often, where his brothers are afraid for their lives that Joseph is just going to lash out and retaliate against them. And Joseph tells them, you know what you intended for evil, God has used for good. So I know that there are some parallels to your story there where people harmed you. But God can redeem anything. God can redeem any story, and he can use it for his glory and for our good. And that's really what I see in your life. And I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of, I haven't known you for a long time, but I'm just so honored to sit here and talk with you about this and to watch how fulfilled and walking in your purpose you are. So I really appreciate you just sitting and having this conversation with me.
And I appreciate you inviting me. Truly, it's been great talking with you.